In this lesson, we will talk about the framework of the startup operation process. That is, the structure of the startup operation process. Let's take a look. The power supply outputs power to the hard disk. For example, the hard disk has a 3 volts power supply and a 1.8 volts power supply. Then the power supply outputs power to CPU, the temporary storage on the CPU circuit, or to the CPU baseband. Some CPUs have a baseband integrated in them. BB is the code name here. VCORE is the core power supply of the CPU. VGPU refers to the power supply for the GPU. VMODM refers to the power supply for the baseband. At the same time, it will also supply power to the application circuit and other chips, usually 1 to 3 volts. After the power supply is supplied to the hard disk, CPU, and the temporary storage, then the clock circuit composed of the crystal oscillator and the power supply chip will provide a clock signal to the CPU circuit, which is original working on standby. The CPU will also send the clock signal to the hard disk at this time. And then the power supply will send the reset signal to the CPU. The CPU will also reset the font library. At this time, the CPU works. Reads the boot program in the hard disk through data communication to perform self-test. The CPU performs self-test on itself, temporary storage, and hard disk. After the self-test is OK, it continues to load the boot program. The CPU needs to output hold signal to the power supply. PSHOLD is hold signal. The power supply will continue to output power and maintain a normal power on state. Well, this is the complete startup process of the phone. We will use this process when repairing the no booting failure. As a whole, this process is sequential. For example, the first step is the battery, and the second step is charging chip. If there is no problem, it will output the main power supply. The third step, the clock circuit is running in standby mode. The power supply gives a voltage of 1.8 volts to the power on signal line. Next, let's pull down the power on signal. It outputs the power supply of the hard disk, the power supply of the CPU, and the power supply of the temporary storage. The power chip sends the clock signal to CPU, and then to hard disk. Then the power supply sends the reset signal to CPU, and the CPU resets hard disk. After the reset is obtained, the CPU will start self-test. What does read the boot program through? It reads the boot program by sending and receiving data. If there is no problem with the self-test, it will output hold signal, PSHOLD. At this point, its loading and booting program is basically completed. This is the framework of the startup operation. Okay, that's it for this lesson.